Okay, so let's be real for a sec. You're probably listening to this because you've got some goals, right? Some big, some small, but all those things you're hoping to achieve.
But sometimes those goals, they can feel kind of impossible.
Like you're trying to, I don't know, climb a mountain wearing flip-flops.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And that's what we're going to dive into today.
We're going deep into this awesome source, figuring out why goals sometimes totally flop.
And more importantly, how we can actually make them happen.
And to help us with all of this, we've got, well, our expert here, ready to break down the psychology of it all.
It's super interesting, like we all want to achieve things. It's in our nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there are these common traps we fall into.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And knowing what those are, that's step one to actually getting past them.
Totally. So the source we're looking at, it lays out these 4 main reasons why goals tend to crash and burn. Vague goals, no systems, fear of failing, and just relying way too much on motivation.
All the classics.
Oh, totally. I know I've definitely been guilty of setting vague goals like, oh, I want to be more organized, or I'm going to learn a new language this year. Sounds all good and inspiring, but then where do you even start?
That's the exact reason those vague goals, they never work out.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, if you don't know where you're going, how are you going to plan a route to get there?
Makes sense.
A big takeaway from the source is this being specific. It's like having laser focus for whatever you're trying to do.
Mm.
Instead of learn a new language, think, have a basic conversation in Spanish by the end of the year. Big difference, right?
Huge.
You've actually got something real to work towards.
Totally. And speaking of real, tangible things, what about systems? I'm amazing at getting all excited about a new goal, but then everyday life gets in the way,
Yeah.
Is that where systems come in?
Absolutely. Systems are like the framework for doing something consistently.
Yeah.
Think of trying to build a house, but you've got no blueprints.
Yeah.
Total chaos.
Oh, yeah. Big time.
Systems, those are your blueprints for your goals. Could be something as simple as blocking out time on your calendar, for language practice, or maybe breaking down a giant project into smaller bits.
I gotta admit, I'm not always the best at sticking to those systems, even when I make them.
Happens to the best of us.
And I know a big hurdle for me is, well, being scared of failing. Sometimes it's easier to just not try at all than to risk messing things up.
Totally common fear. And the source, it gets this so right. It suggests we kind of reframe how we think about failure. Instead of seeing it as this big roadblock, what if it's just, valuable feedback?
Interesting.
Like, think about it. Every single successful person you can think of, they've probably messed up a ton along the way.
I'm sure they have.
Difference is they learned from those screw-ups and kept going.
Okay, that's a really good way to look at it. It's not about never failing, but about what you do after, turning it into something helpful. What about motivation, though?
Yeah.
That's going to be a big part of reaching goals, right? Like, it's hard to stay committed if you're just not feeling it.
While that initial burst of motivation can get you started, it kind of fades away,
Oh, for sure.
Discipline and consistency. Those are the things that make for long-term success. And that's where habits become super important. Think about it. Brushing your teeth. You're not doing that because you're super motivated every morning. It's a habit, something you do automatically. We got to approach our goals that same way.
So it's more about building those good habits that kind of back up our goals rather than waiting for those random bursts of motivation to hit.
Yep, exactly that.
Now, the source, it talks about this framework that acts like, I don't know, scaffolding to hold up your goals. The SMARTER framework. I'm super curious about this.
Yeah, the SMARTER framework, it's like this really structured way to think about goal setting, making it way more likely you'll actually get to where you want to be. Each letter stands for something specific that helps you get there. Let's break it down, starting with S for specific.
All right, specific. We talked a bit about this earlier, like setting those clear, well-defined goals. What else should we keep in mind when it comes to being specific?
Think about this. Have you ever felt totally overwhelmed by something you had to do? Like it felt way too big or complicated?
Oh, yeah.
Being specific helps with that overwhelm because it breaks down goals into smaller, doable chunks.
Yeah.
It's like having a detailed recipe instead of just a vague idea of what you're cooking.
Love that.
The clearer the instructions, the easier it is to follow them.
Right. That's a perfect analogy.
Right.
So it's not just about knowing what you want. It's about breaking it down into those super concrete steps.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, what about M for measurable?
Oh, that's a good one.
I'll be honest, sometimes tracking my progress feels kind of, I don't know, boring.
Sure.
Does it really make that much of a difference?
I hear ya, but tracking your progress is actually really powerful. It's not about checking boxes. It's about having real proof that you're doing something, making those efforts. Have you ever noticed like how good it feels to see your fitness tracker light up when you hit your steps for the day?
Yeah.
That's the power of measurable progress. It gives you that feeling of accomplishment, keeps you going.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. Seeing those wins, even the little ones, it keeps the momentum going. So it's not just about setting the goal and crossing your fingers. It's about building a system to see how far you've come and celebrate those little milestones.
Exactly.
Now, on to A for achievable.
All right, achievable.
I'm guessing this is all about being realistic with those goals. I have this tendency to get a little carried away with my dreams sometimes.
Oh, you and me both. But here's the thing. Setting goals that are like way out of reach, it can actually make things worse. If you constantly feel like you're failing, it's easy to just give up, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
Achievable goals are about finding that sweet spot between challenging yourself and setting yourself up to win.
That makes total sense. I once set this goal to run a marathon, but I only gave myself like a month to train. Talk about setting myself up for disaster.
Right.
I ended up feeling totally defeated, like I couldn't do anything right.
Yeah, that's the perfect example of how having those unrealistic expectations can backfire.
For sure.
It's super important to be honest with yourself about what you can actually do right now and what resources you've got. And remember, you can always tweak your goals as you go along.
Okay, so it's not about limiting ourselves, but about setting ourselves up for success by being real about what we can actually achieve. Now, this next one, R for relevant, this one really gets me thinking.
Oh, yeah. This is where we got to connect our goals to and our values and what we really care about.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Take a minute to ask yourself, why does this goal actually matter to me? If it doesn't line up with what's truly important, it's going to be way harder to stick with it.
That's a really good point. And it's got to be meaningful, not just some random thing on a to-do list. We've got to actually care about what we're trying to do. Now, let's talk about T for time-bound. I have a kind of love-hate relationship with deadlines. They can feel restricting sometimes, but I also know they can be really motivating.
Exactly. Have you ever noticed how when you have a deadline coming up, suddenly that task feels super important? That's because deadlines, they tap into that like natural sense of urgency we have. Without a clear time frame, it's way too easy to procrastinate, let those goals slip away. But when we set that deadline, we're creating accountability, you know, we create momentum.
So deadlines, they're not about creating all this unnecessary pressure. They're about making a structure that pushes us forward.
Yeah.
It's like setting a launch date for a rocket. It forces you to get everything ready for takeoff. Now, this next one, E for evaluative, is something I've honestly struggled with. I tend to just hit the goal and then go, go, go without ever stopping to think about it.
Oh, yeah.
So what's the deal with evaluative?
Evaluative just means you're regularly checking in on how you're doing with your goal, making changes if you need to. It's like checking the math on a road trip. You got to make sure you're still headed in the right direction, you know, adjust your route if necessary.
So it's not just setting it and forgetting it. It's about building in those moments to think about what's working, what's not, and maybe change things up a bit.
Exactly.
How often would you say we should do these check-ins?
That kind of depends on the goal itself, but doing it weekly or monthly, that's a pretty good place to start.
Okay.
The main thing is to make it a habit.
I like that. Regular check-ins to stay on track and make changes as you need them. And finally, we've got R for rewarding. Now, this is the fun part, right?
Rewards, they're seriously powerful. When we celebrate our wins, even the little ones, it reinforces doing those good things.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be anything fancy, you know.
Yeah.
It's about picking rewards that actually mean something to you.
So if I'm a total bookworm, my reward for finishing a project could be getting myself a new book.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or maybe if you love trying new foods, it could be going to that restaurant you've been wanting to check
I
out.
love that.
It's got to be personal.
This framework is amazing. It's so practical you can actually use it. But I'm curious, is it enough to just have a great framework? I mean, we've all been there, right? We've set these super smarter goals, and they still didn't work out. So what's missing?
You're totally right. Having a good framework is a fantastic start. But there's this other crucial element that can make or break it all.
Okay, what is it?
Our mindset. And that's exactly what we're going to dig into next.
So we've got our smarter goals all set. We know what those letters stand for, how to use them, all that good stuff. But like we just talked about, there's this other piece to the puzzle.
Mindset.
Right.
It's actually crazy how much our mindset affects what we do and then the results we get. The source, it talks about these 3 key mindset shifts.
Okay.
Real game changers when it comes to actually hitting those goals.
I am so ready for a mindset upgrade. Hit me with it.
Okay, so the first shift is all about progress, not perfection. And I think this is something so many of us get stuck on, trying to do everything perfectly. And it ends up making us procrastinate. We don't do anything at all.
Oh, tell me about it. I'm the queen of overthinking, overplanning, to the point where I never even get started. It's like I'm too scared to take the first step unless it's like perfect.
That's the perfection trap right there. And the source, it really emphasizes this: we got to embrace imperfection. Think about it this way. If you were learning to play, I don't know, guitar or piano, would you expect to sound like a pro right away?
No way.
Probably not, right?
Definitely not.
It takes time, practice, and messing up along the way.
It's like that saying, practice makes progress, not perfect.
Exactly. And that actually leads right into the second mindset shift.
Okay. Which is?
Embracing failure.
Whoa, hold on. Embracing failure, that sounds kind of backwards. Isn't the point of goals to, succeed?
It's natural to want to avoid messing up. But here's the thing. Failure, it's going to happen. It's part of the process. What really separates those who reach their goals from those who don't is how they look at failure. The source, it talks about reframing failure. Instead of this negative thing, it's a chance to learn, to adjust course, to get insights that can actually help you move forward.
So it's not about never failing, but about changing how we think about it. Instead of seeing it as a setback, it's like feedback. It helps us grow. It's funny, I've been reading about this thing called the growth mindset.
Oh, yeah.
And this idea of being okay with failing, it totally fits in. It's all about seeing challenges as opportunities, not threats. Like a chance to learn and get better, not something that hurts our ego.
You got it. That's the growth mindset in a nutshell. It's about believing that we can get better at things through hard work, dedication, all that. And when we look at failure that way, it becomes less about our self-worth and more like data, information that helps us improve.
This reminds me of this time I totally bombed a presentation at work. Oh my gosh, it was so embarrassing. But looking back, I learned so much from it. It made me rethink how I do presentations. And honestly, I'm way better at it now because of that. If I had let that fear of failing stop me, I wouldn't be where I am now.
Exactly. That's a perfect example of how reframing failure, seeing it in a new light, can actually lead to growth. And it leads us right into the third mindset shift the source talks about: the power of identity-based goals.
Okay, identity-based goals. I'm all ears. This sounds interesting. What's the idea here?
So it's about making your goals match the person you want to be. Instead of saying, I want to write a book, you say, I am a writer.
Interesting.
It's subtle, but it's a powerful way to change how you think about things.
So it's like embodying those qualities, those habits of the person you're trying to become.
Exactly. This is tapping into something called self-fulfilling prophecy. Basically, what we believe about ourselves really does shape what we do and what happens to us. When you see yourself as a writer, you're going to prioritize writing, look for ways to get better, and hang out with other writers. It becomes part of who you are, not just something you're trying to check off a list.
I love this. It's like instead of saying, I want to be more organized, I say, I am an organized person.
Exactly.
It feels more powerful, like it's already part of me.
Yeah, and that shift, how you see yourself, it can change your habits, the choices you make, all that. It's not just about hitting one specific goal. It's about becoming the kind of person who naturally achieves those goals.
So we've got the smarter framework, these awesome mindset shifts. It's like we have the tools and the map to guide us on this whole goal-achieving journey. But what's the big takeaway here? What's the one thing we should really remember and act on?
Well, the source, it makes this point really clear. Knowledge without action, it's like a car without an engine. It's not going to get you anywhere.
So we can't just listen to all this and do nothing. We actually have to use it.
Exactly. Remember that goal you've been putting off, the one that's been kind of lurking in the back of your mind. This is your chance to finally do something about it.
Yeah, take it out of the someday pile and actually make a plan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And don't get overwhelmed by the whole planning thing. Start small. Break that goal down into baby steps.
Right.
What's one little thing you could do today to get a little bit closer?
That's a great question for all of us listening, right? What's one tiny step we can take right now? Could be making a list, doing some research, even just blocking off time in our calendar.
Even those little things, if you do them consistently, they add up. You build momentum, start trusting the process.
This whole deep dive has been so eye-opening. I actually feel like I can tackle those goals I've been avoiding. We learned why goals fail, but more importantly, how to actually make them happen.
We talked about setting those smarter goals. Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound. and how important systems are to support those goals.
Right, and how we need the right mindset, embracing the progress, not being scared of messing up.
Oh, and celebrating those wins along the way, big or small.
Totally. Those little victories keep us going.
So, as we wrap things up, I want to leave you with one last thought. Think about the person you want to be, the future you, who's already achieved those goals. What kind of person are they? What habits do they have?
That's a great question to think about. And remember, success, it's not a finish line, it's a journey. Enjoy the ride, be nice to yourself along the way, and never stop learning. Until next time, keep reaching for those goals.